most people know you, so I'm going to skip the intro this time. They know that you are the co-author of what coined this term, conscious capitalism. And you gave us a brief explanation. I didn't know about that. Where does the term actually come from? And why don't you share that again, that story?
Yes, Konstantin, well, good to be with you and with all of your attendees today. The term was coined originally in, I think, 1997 by Muhammad Yunus, who is well known as the founder of the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, the originator of the micro-lending concept. And he was using it to describe what today we would call a social business that only has a social purpose, and all its surplus is reinvested back in achieving that social purpose. But we apply it more broadly to all businesses. And we say society is a key stakeholder, maybe the first stakeholder of a business, but that it's also important to have a financial stakeholder, that generating wealth is also a necessary component. Because if every business becomes a social business, then we don't have profits and we don't have taxes, and without taxes, we don't have infrastructure and we don't have public services and all the rest of it, right? So we need a healthy business sector generating profits in the right way. And that's what this is about, that how can we create simultaneous value, not only for investors, but all of the stakeholders.
Okay. Well, let's pick out one of these aspects and quickly talk about the core, given we have a lot of entrepreneurs, startups, and CEOs on the phone. And I'm going to start the question, and then I have a follow-up question on this, on what makes a leader conscious?
Well, to be conscious is to be mindful, to be awake, to be connected to a higher purpose, to be rooted in your authentic self. And so conscious leaders, I use the acronym SELFLESS to describe them, that they have transcended the self. They are about service to the collective whole, service to the people and to the purpose of the entity that they lead. They're not about ego, and they're not about power and money. And they're certainly not about using people to achieve their own goals. That's the definition of a tyrant. That's not a leader. A true leader is there to take people to a better place. And a conscious leader does that in a mindful way, creating a vision, and then figuring out how do we all get there together, right? In a way that everybody matters and everybody wins. And then we can talk about the qualities of what such leaders tend to have.
Well, let me actually pick up on one that you didn't mention in this case explicitly here, but I know you actually wrote an entire book using that same term, which is healing. And one of your first books is called The Healing Organization. And when we met, it must have been either by phone or lately last year in Madrid, you used it in terms of leaders have to go through a certain personal healing. And I found that very impressive. So can you maybe specify and double click, what do you mean by healing actually of people? And you need to have a healing process in order to be an appropriate leader for such an organization. Specify that.
Yes, so The Healing Organization is my more recent book, came out in 2019. And the idea of that is that fundamentally business is supposed to be about us meeting each other's needs and essentially taking care of each other, right? When we meet somebody's needs, you take care of them. And in a free society, that's what businesses are responsible to do. Unfortunately, when we made it all about money and ego and power, we ended up using other people to achieve our goals rather than using business as a way to serve each other. And that created a lot of suffering. There's a tremendous evidence of the fact that, businesses, we create wealth and we create jobs and products and services, but there's also a lot of suffering. There's tremendous stress. Heart attacks are higher on Mondays by 20% in the US and in the UK. 120,000 Americans die from stress every year connected to work. 600,000 Chinese die every year. Most people are disengaged. We're damaging communities, the environment, the planet. There's a lot of suffering being caused in the pursuit of wealth through business. And it doesn't have to be that way. And so that book is an exploration of the idea that actually it can be the opposite. You can actually, while you're creating wealth and jobs and products and services, you can actually be reducing suffering and increasing joy in people's lives, which is what I call healing, right? And promoting healthy growth. And so in order to do that, leaders, again, it all comes down to leadership. Leaders themselves have to work on their own healing. Because if you don't, it's what Carl Jung said, right? Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will drive your life and you will call it fate. The fact is that most people have certain traumas and other things that they've experienced in their life as a child, as an adult. Life is difficult as it is. And unless you deal with those, and unless you heal those and recognize those, you will always be in a very reactive space, right? You will get triggered by certain things. You won't even be in control of your own mental processes in many ways, right? And you will inflict suffering on others as a result. So as they say, hurt people, right? They're victims of victims, all of those. So we have to work on healing ourselves so that we can then emanate that energy into the world. And that includes healing the wounded inner child that many of us carry, right? And other traumas that also exist, in order that we can then show up with love and with genuine dedication and care.
One thing I find very impressive in connecting is when lately you give speeches and you talk to this, you become much more personal and share about your own, I just refer to it as, again, healing process, your own inner journey, and whatever you do want to share, maybe about your own inner journey, and then people can pick out how it relates to their own inner journey, being so important to develop as a leader.
Yeah, there's a book that I've just completed that will come out later this year on that. It's called Awaken, A Journey to Purpose, Wholeness, and Healing. And it is a memoir of my own journey. I'm 63 years old now, so it's actually covers my whole life, but especially focused on the last 20 years or so, and especially the last 4 years, where I had experienced a lot of growth. And partly it's because of what happened when I was writing the Healing Organization. It was an important book project for me. It really, like all the other things I've done since 2005, it came from the heart, forms of endearment, everybody matters, all those things. So, I cared about it, but at some level I was also thinking of it intellectually. I was doing the research and doing the, gathering the stories and all of that. And 4 people, all women, told me that, Raj, if you're writing about healing, what about your own healing? How can you write about healing if you haven't focused on your own healing? I said, well, I don't think I don't have time for that, and I think I'm okay. I don't think I need that. I said, no, everybody needs to heal, and you're going from project to project, and book to book and airport to airport without any gap in between, and you don't actually slow down and spend time with yourself and look inward. And fortunately, I listened to them. I trusted them and I trusted myself to delay the book by 5 months and actually take time off to do those things. And I said yes to a number of opportunities that I had previously declined, saying I have a book deadline. And so I said yes to a trip to the Himalayas, where I turned 60. This was with the Shakti leadership group. We take people on spiritual journeys, which is an offshoot of that book. So this was in the Ladakh region of India, which is on the border with Tibet. And this is a home of deep Buddhist tradition and wisdom, which has a lot to say about suffering and healing. So that was a deep experience. I said yes to a silent retreat in upstate New York with Peter Senge and David Cooperrider and others. And that was a very profound experience to have 4 days of silence, which is a very unusual thing for any of us, in this world, that you are actually able to then listen to your own inner voice and also somehow get connected to source. And I just felt like I was receiving so much wisdom from somewhere. I was just carrying around a notebook and walking around in nature, and I had about 45 pages of notes by the time I was done, including a lot of the framework for an understanding of my own life and what it all meant and how it all fits together. So that happened. I also said yes to a journey to the Amazon rainforest with Lynn Twist, who started the Pachamama Alliance. And this was 10 days deep inside the rainforest with 2 different indigenous people there, the Achuar and the Zapara, getting connected to nature and also experiencing shamanic healing. And the ayahuasca ceremony that they do there, which I found very profound. They call it the grandmother plant that kind of connects you to nature and to Mother Earth. And I had tremendous insights that came to me, visions that came to me that night, which were all about healing, which is why I had gone there. So all of those are in the new book. And I also worked with a coach for the first time that summer. And it was interesting when I told her the story of my life, where I come from. I come from from India, of course, but within India, there are these castes, the caste system, and there's 4 major castes, and I come from the warrior caste, right? So I come from a heritage of people who were deeply traumatized in wars, right? And I come from a family that was a very, very feudal, hyper masculine, patriarchal, system. And I had a tough relationship with my father because of that. And then, but I have a mother who's completely the opposite of that, pure unconditional love. My father was very harsh and only had conditional love. And so I had an estrangement from him for many years and so forth. And then I discovered, and I was doing work that didn't matter to me, and I was unhappy in every aspect of my life. And then I discovered this path in 2004 when I started the book Forms of Endearment, which then led to Conscious Capitalism. And what she said to me was, you realize that you spent 45 years trying to impress your father, but then you've spent the last 15 years honoring your mother with your work. That the work you've been doing is really reflecting her energy, and her way of being into the world, and that was a deep insight for me, because I had never thought about it that way. I just said, to me, it was just what I, understood. And so that was a deep insight as well, and so all of those things, put together got me to a deeper place of self-awareness and understanding my own journey. And I had visions of when I was a small child, and all the abuse and the toxic behavior that I witnessed as a young child in the village in India. All of that, the abuse of women, for example, that somehow I had those experiences, so that 45 years later, I would write a book about the feminine, right? So it all kind of connected together in a way. Life made sense, right? And my discovery of purpose, and then my recognition of the need for wholeness, that it's not just about masculine, feminine, you need to put them together, right? To integrate best of the masculine, best of the feminine. And then this need for healing. I actually surfaced traumas that I didn't even realize I had. There were memories I had suppressed, and there were deep traumas, between me and my father, and also my family history. So there's individual trauma, there's family trauma, right? There's ancestral trauma, and then there's collective trauma, what we are going through in the world with the epidemic and the war and all of these kinds of things. So there's just a tremendous recognition of the need for healing, and that's a never-ending journey. So I can't say that I'm fully healed today, but at least I'm on that path, right? And I'm learning as I go.
Picking it up from there, on the path and going through an inner journey, and you gave a whole history of very specific activities that helped you on your journey. My question, and there's only a very rough, brief answer, this doesn't pretend to be representative. You meet a lot of people in business, some of them very senior leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, etc. Would you argue that in general, there's still a significant lack of leaders acknowledging and being willing to walk the difficult walk of an inner journey?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Sorry. I would say the vast majority of leaders are in their head, and they're not connected to their heart, and they haven't done that inner exploration. That's what our system kind of educates people in that way. And you're supposed to leave your personal, stuff at home, right? And you put on your mask and you put on your armor and you go to do battle in the workplace. So I would say that, yeah, most leaders are not self-aware. They don't know their own triggers. They haven't looked inward, at their own traumas, right? So they really are reactive in many ways to what happens around them. And they're not leading from the inside out. And they're not leading from a healed place. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, which is why the bulk of our work now, my time is on this work of conscious leadership, and how do we take people on that journey, to develop that.
Let me switch gears a little bit. In one of the talks that I listened to you lately, you come up, and maybe it has to do with the phases of life. And you mentioned that you're 62. Kind of, you start looking back in terms of legacy, and what is the impact? And what I'm trying to get to is not only to your personal impact and your preliminary summary, what do you think that legacy will be, but impact through conscious capitalism. Let me be specific on two questions. One, I'm not trying to make this organizational or governmental, etc., but being as a movement, seeing how things evolve, do you think there's enough impact, this movement, or jointly with other movements like benefit corporations, Plan B, inclusive capitalism? There's many different initiatives around the same topic. Anything that comes to your mind, say, well, we could make a bigger impact if jointly, together, or as conscious capitalism. What do you think would help further to accelerate change? That could be maybe a broader way to ask the question.
Yeah, so definitely there are many parallel movements, as you said, that have been using their own language, and there are some differences. They're not exactly the same. They have some slight different emphasis in some cases. But I think the coming together is important. So that is something that a couple of years ago started to happen with the formation of what is called Imperative 21, which is an organization that actually includes about 8 other organizations like Conscious Capitalism, Just Capital, Inclusive Capitalism, B Corp, B Team, etc., to create a shared agenda and platform and to try to amplify our voice. So that is ongoing. J. Cohen Gilbert is the CEO of that now. He's one of the founders of B Labs. I think that is happening. I think the other elements of this, which is why I am now at Monterey Tech, is the need to reinvent business education, or to evolve business education, because to the large degree, business schools are still teaching the old paradigm. They might have a few elective courses on sustainability and so forth, but the core curriculum is still rooted in the old paradigm of shareholder value and profit maximization. And so we're also trying to create a change there, right? And to lead a rethinking of business education, so that future leaders are not taught, they don't have to unlearn what they have been taught. So that is a second dimension. And I think the third one is on the public policy side, where governments and regulators do have, I think, an impact and a role to facilitate this transformation, to evolve it, more rapidly in that way, so that businesses are either required or encouraged or incentivized to operate in this way. And I think their policy, I think Europe actually is more of a leader in that regard. I think the governments there tend to take a more active approach, right? For example, in requiring employee representation on boards, right? Those kinds of things. But also, I think taxation is another, even changing the articles of incorporation, or what do you have to commit to be a public company, right? Like B Corp has done that, but I think there's also like a new stock exchange in the US called the Long-Term Stock Exchange, which has different rules. So I think there are all these different levers that will need to be pushed in order for this change really to happen. And we know that this is urgent and this is important. The sense of urgency is growing every time we see a new report on the climate issue. But that's one of the big issues in the world, as we all know. But there's also income inequality, and all that has done the last 40 years. There's a dramatic reversal of what had been true the previous 50 years before that, or 40, 50 years before that, which is that businesses were in fact more stakeholder oriented, right, in the mid part of the last century. And then around 1970, they started becoming more focused on this narrow way of being, right? So all of these things need to change, because otherwise we don't have a future here. Business as usual is going to lead us into a very dark future.
Yeah, I know. That's what we talk. So what I like, and you already kind of answered that question, is that some of the regions, you mentioned Europe, they actually are more active promoting corporate social responsibility and responsible business conduct. That's actually the name of the program they have. And one thing that I picked up that you think is necessary, because that would have been one question, just want to be sure, is that leaving it only to the free market, because I know some people in conscious capitalism are extremely, I'm not trying to get systematic here, free market, and the market will take care of itself, while Europe more has a sense of, we should side this with institutional change. In which area, maybe in the middle, maybe more on the free capitalism side, maybe more on the European side, where do you put yourself on the best mix of making the biggest impact overall? How much institutional change is critical?
Yeah, I believe that, to change a system, because this is a system, right, that we have created, that includes companies and leaders and etc., but it also has certain elements that are at the system level, right, that shape behavior. So we have to address it at all levels. Right, so we have to address it at the system level, right? So what are the incentives, what are the regulations, what are the laws, etc., that are encouraging certain kinds of behavior? How do we change that? And then, of course, the bulk of our time with conscious capitalism is aimed at individual leaders of companies, shifting their consciousness and waking them up, right? So that they can then start to behave differently. But they too are part of a larger system. So it is possible for them to change, and they are changing, but we cannot achieve the kind of change that we need, I think, only at that level. So I'm in the camp that we need to have all sectors participating in this shift. The public sector, the governments, of course, business and civil society, as we call it, right? The NGOs, universities, and other entities. All of them have to be part of this shift.
Let me pick up on another possible inhibitor to make the impact, and you may have an idea. It's on the investment money. We hear a lot of, especially young entrepreneurs, very conscious and very willing to contribute, very purpose-driven, and most of them obviously struggle with the money that they attract, the typical investment dollar, being very old school, quarterly earnings, you got to meet your numbers, etc., etc. How would any idea on how people actually should take care of that, deal with that? And that could be, there's two aspects of this question. One, do you have any advice, any experience to young entrepreneurs who attract capital on how selective could and should they be? And obviously they need to make progress, so they need the money, and yet they probably should at some point say, I'm not willing to trade off a purpose and being conscious for just having access to a higher amount of money. And the second nature of the question is, again, is there anything either on institutional side that one could do to the whole investment world, helping that change, because it drives so much behavior in the Wall Streets of this world?
Mm-hmm. Well, on the first question, I think it's critical what kind of investors you attract, right? Investors have to be aligned with you on multiple fronts, on purpose, on values, on timeline, right? Investors, like all stakeholders, have different levels of needs, right? So they need returns, of course. They also more and more are looking at impact, and many are looking at legacy, right? So how do we make sure that we align and partner with, because this is a long-term relationship and it is going to shape the future. And there are many examples of people who take money from the wrong kind of investors who don't have that alignment with them. Why? Because there's somebody offering them the highest valuation, right? And they say, okay, I'm going to go with whoever is giving me the most money or valuing my company the highest. But control is more important than valuation. And if you lose control, if you give up that to VCs and others, the mainstream investors don't care about your purpose. They don't care about your people, right? All they're looking for is returns. And if they see you going in a direction they don't like, they will take your company and put somebody else in charge, right? Or they will shut it down. So I think there are many sad stories like that of founders' visions not being able to be realized because they haven't got the right kind of investors who also have a long-term horizon. They have patience, right? Because anything workable, takes time. So I think it's critically important. The good news is there is more and more money out there now. Capital does not seem to be a constraint. on good business ideas.
Conscious money.
Yeah, so there's a lot of conscious money out there, and it's growing. The proportion is growing. And you look at that sector and you see the biggest players in the world. I mean, BlackRock, right, which is the largest money manager in the world with, I think, now up to $10 trillion of assets under management. They are very much now looking at investments through this filter, right? And they use the phrase conscious capitalism. Larry Fink has been using that for years now. And they're the leader. And then number two is State Street, and then Vanguard are also following in that way. They're all talking long-term. They're talking stakeholders. They're talking purpose, right? All of those. And of course, incorporating the environment as a stakeholder. So I think the good news is that it's becoming less of a challenge to find the right kind of money. You still have to try, right? And put in that effort to do so. I think institutionally, some of the things that we talked about earlier, changing. I think the big challenge has been public companies are more, it has become more difficult for public companies in a way to be conscious, or at least in the past. Private companies can do what they think is the right thing without worrying about the stock price or analysts dumping their stock, etc. And I think we have to reform that. We have to get away from that quarterly cycle and just a financial lens. And there are different ways now of measuring and valuing. And and ultimately we know, and our research, my research, and others has shown that we're not asking people to make a choice between good returns and a positive overall impact in the world, that those two things go together. In fact, there's evidence that this leads to much higher returns over time, right? If you say, I need results next quarter, next year, no, it takes time, right? But over time, then these do generate. And we understand why that is. Why is the business model superior in these cases? It's rooted in loyalty, right? You don't have to spend so much money on marketing. Employee turnover is very, very low. Employee engagement is very high. Legal costs are lower. Administrative costs are lower. There's more innovation. All of those things. So these are just stronger businesses because they've got all these pieces working together rather than everybody being kind of a competitor with each other within the company. That's in a traditional business. So there's I think good cause for optimism on that front, I believe.
That sounds good. Let me follow up on one of the institutions you mentioned, BlackRock, and being so dominant. And yes, they smartly, slowly adapt this verbiage. I know that they do. The Davos report explicitly talked about that. And then even many companies adopt the ESG definition of the UN and make it part of what they commit to. So they all seek a more holistic way to measure the business impact. My question to you is, have you seen some very practical in companies, some creative solutions that some companies came across to overcome this dominance of financial measures? I'm just looking for some specific examples on how companies have done that to move away or beyond the dominance of the financial measures.
Well, it's their choice. Companies can use those measures, right? And use them to compensate people. So one of the companies I'm quite familiar with is FIFCO, which is the largest public company in Costa Rica. And Ramon Mendiola Sanchez is the CEO. I've written about him in the Healing Organization as well as in the Field Guide. And Ramon has changed executive compensation in the company. It used to be, and still is at many companies, 100% of the bonus of executives is based upon financial measures, right? The stock price, market share, profitability, etc. And he has now made it 60%. So 40% is non-financial. And that includes the environment, it includes society, it includes employees and well-being and so forth, right? And so I think that is one of the key elements here. We have to align all of the, when we say one thing and we actually reward something else, that then creates a misfit between those. So companies, I believe, should be doing that. I mean, Ramon is planning to make it 50%, right, of it being financial. And by the way, his company has grown 10x, in the last 18 years that he has been leading it, and 7% of their net profits are actually devoted to social issues that they care about. And despite all of that, I mean, they are growing much faster and much more profitable, and their share price is doing much, much better while they're doing this, right? The fact is that, being a shareholder focused or completely driven by that actually is not good for shareholders. And it causes many other kinds of damage to other stakeholders when you are exclusively running a business with that short-term financial lens, right? It's the evidence on that is very, very strong now.
So you mentioned stakeholders many times, and to my limited knowledge, it was Professor Ed Friedman who maybe not invented the term, but gave it breathed new life into it. Whatever, some 20, 30 years ago. I'm talking about stakeholder capitalism a lot. And I'm referring to that because I know that recently, maybe a year or two ago, he issued a new book called The Power of And.
Mm-hmm.
Responsible business without trade-offs. So the case you mentioned about this entrepreneur in Costa Rica, and I know there's many others, they all try to master that, which is when it boils down and comes down to specific decisions, which come so difficult to many entrepreneurs. And maybe you can share a word of optimism, of courage, of whatever, and give examples to withstand that notion of, I can either be profitable and look at the cost line, etc., or be socially responsible. So this power of and I found very, very powerful indeed. And I would like you to maybe elaborate further on it in your own words.
Yeah, so this is really rooted in the idea of polarities. We tend to think of many things in life as black or white, either or, right? I can either be this or I can be that. And profit and purpose are one of them, but even if you look at things like masculine and feminine, we see that as a polarity. But the fact is that the many things that are seen as alternatives are actually complementary. They complete each other, right? They don't exist without the other. Right? So masculine and feminine are complementary to each other. And the best thing we can do as humans is to integrate both of them, to become whole, to have the strength and the courage and the discipline and the focus and resilience and the love and the compassion and the caring and the empathy, right? We must do both of those things. It's not either or, right? And so this is one of the very, very important elements of being a conscious business, is letting go of trade-off thinking, right? Where you have to pick one or the other, and saying, no, we can do both. Right? So define the synergy. The fact is, trade-offs are easy. If you accept trade-offs, you will find them everywhere. Right? Short-term, long-term, employee well-being versus investor returns. All of those things can look like trade-offs if you've got a certain mental model and way of looking at things. If you adopt what I call a simplistic approach to business, the simplistic approach, which is that business is only about profit, and profit equals revenue minus cost. Right? And therefore, the way to achieve the goal of higher profits is maximize revenue, minimize cost. How do you do that? You charge as much as possible and you sell as much as possible, whether people need it or not. And then you reduce your cost by paying your people as little as possible, squeezing your suppliers, if you have the power to do so, externalizing burdens onto society and into the future. And then you achieved your profit. But that profit is not worth anything. That is actually, that business is more a parasite. It is not creating value, it is extracting value, right? It's leaving people weaker. So that is a one mental model, but then you have the other side, what Oliver Wendell Holmes called the simplicity on the other side of complexity, which is, a conscious business like HEB, and their CEO says to their executives, please pay our people as much as possible, right? And let's give our customers the best possible, highest amount of value. And let's invest in our communities and be, the most beloved store and company in all of Texas, and showing up when there's a natural disaster and hurricane. They do so much for all of their stakeholders, and they're highly, highly profitable and successful. Right? So when you start to recognize that these things can be positively correlated, right? That when you pay your people well and treat them well, they become more productive, their employee turnover goes down, they're more creative, innovative, caring, etc. You get much more positive impact on the business, and likewise for all of the stakeholders, right? So this is one of those fundamental mental shifts that we have to make, right? And this really requires systems thinking. So when you see this not as a simple machine of one causing A causing B, but this is a complex, interconnected, interdependent living system, right? And that everything that happens to any piece of the system affects the whole, and we have to understand how it connects together. Then we can start to lead it in a way that simultaneously, as I used the phrase earlier, everybody matters and everybody needs to win in that system. If anybody is losing, in our system, that means that we haven't actually arrived at the right solution. Right? We have to go back and say, why is it that our hourly workers are suffering, even as our salaried people are doing well? That's not okay, right? Or why is it that certain employees are not thriving, even our overall employee engagement might be 90%. So it has to be thought about in that way. So I think it's an important concept.
Let me follow up on that one company you mentioned, HEB, I think was the name, right? And the way you talked about it, and I'm sure it is valid, it can't be any other way, I imagine. This must be so ingrained in their culture. So I want to switch over a bit to the cultural aspect. And we all know the famous phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And while every company culture is unique, it has to be and it should be, I'm kind of interested, without going through the generalities of what you define as a conscious culture, if we, as we have many people in the audience that own small companies or are startups, so they are still much more in a phase than bigger corporations to be able to shape the culture. What would be your advice of which critical few ingredients these cultures which are still being built up should have, while respecting uniqueness? Every company always is a reflection of the leader's values as well. What would be your take as you would think of consulting a company that still has some leeway to go and building a culture?
And I think the two would be trust and caring.
Okay.
You have to have a culture that people have, there's a high level of trust, right? That people, there's self-trust, and then there's trust in each other, right? As a leadership team and as colleagues and employees, and genuine caring for human beings at the core, right? And I know, beyond that, I use tactile as the acronym here. So it's trust, is also authenticity and accountability, it's caring, it's transparency, integrity, learning, and empowerment. But if I had to again distill it down to the most essential elements, it would be trust and caring. With even between those two, caring is the highest. If people feel they're genuinely cared for, and they're able to then care for others as well, right? That was my book with Bob Chapman, where caring it's at the core, it's about caring. Everybody matters, where Bob says everybody is somebody's precious child, right? And if it was my son or daughter, or your son or daughter, I would make sure that they're doing well. I would care for them. Why wouldn't I do that for somebody else's son or daughter? Right. So that caring is essential. And HEB was started by the grandmother of the current CEO. Florence Butt started it in 1917, and she was a deeply spiritual woman who was all about caring for people. She started a little grocery store, but then at the end of the day, she would take a wheelbarrow and her kids, and they would take food down to the homeless people and living by the river. And so that's DNA is in the company. That DNA of caring. And that's what carries through today, which is why they are so beloved, as a company. I think that is the fundamental element.
Let me follow up on that, specifically the beginnings and the story of the HEB culture forming. And I hope I don't come across negative by asking this question this way. Have you seen realistic cases, realistic in terms of sustainable, beyond the initial fuzz of more established companies, bigger ones that then used to make a bigger impact in the way how they serve their customers, their markets, pay taxes, etc., to really change their culture? Meaning, if you don't start conscious, have you really seen realistic, sustainable ways how to become conscious, ingrained in the culture later? Is that a realistic proposal, honestly?
Absolutely. And the best example currently in the world, I think the best one right now, is Microsoft. Okay, so Microsoft, we all know, everybody's life has been touched by Microsoft. Bill Gates started it. He had a very clear purpose, a computer on every desk, right? And that was a vision that he had, and a computer running Microsoft software, of course. And that purpose in a way was realized. And then after that, the company drifted without a purpose, and they got a different CEO, Steve Ballmer. And without a purpose, he made it only about profit and only about the numbers. 14 years he ran the company, and it did nothing. And it became increasingly relevant. It was like a kingdom who was in decline. There was really, people say, why do we even need Microsoft anymore, right? And the culture was terrible, and people, there was no trust, and there was no collaboration across divisions and so forth. And for 14 years, they were flat, right? So Bill Gates created a lot of value, but he was very arrogant, kind of a dog-eat-dog culture. And then Barma, and then Satya Nadella became CEO 7 years ago and completely changed the culture. And he did it by showing up as an authentic human being. In his first meeting with his leadership team, he shared his own challenges in his life, his special needs son who just died, by the way, and his daughter who also had problems, and his, growing up, his sister died. And, he just came across as a human and deep empathy. And that then became the norm for all the other leaders, and the team. Everybody then opened up at a human level and started to connect with each other. And then they've made empathy part of the Microsoft culture now, growth mindset, empathy, and as the mantra that Satya now uses is, as leaders, we have to model, we have to coach, and we have to care. We have to model the behavior we want to see, right, from others. We have to help people get there and coach them, and we have to genuinely care for them as a human being, not just what can they do for the business and how can they, who can give me the numbers, right? And with that, you look at the 7-year track record. I mean, it was 350 billion in market cap when he came in, and it's now something like 2.4 trillion. No leader in the history of the world has created as much financial wealth as Satya has at Microsoft. But it's not just financial, and he has never talked about the share price and the market cap, right? He has a very strong strategy, and he does all these things. But they are also at number 1 on Just Capital's rankings, right? If you look at diversity and inclusion, if you look at environmental stuff, if you look at the future of work and flexibility and everything. So they are leading in all dimensions. Right? And a tremendous, I could never have thought in the past that Microsoft would be known for empathy and caring. Right?
Indeed.
You don't associate that. So it is absolutely possible, and it's all about the leader bringing in that.
Beautiful example. And we're going to wrap up with a 30-second question. You said once at 62, you start thinking what your legacy should be. Any interim insight in what you would like your legacy to be? Well, or not yet.
Yeah, the way I articulate my purpose is to bring heart, healing, courage, and soul to business and leadership, so that we can build a better world for all. And I really feel like that would be the legacy, if I feel like we have shifted and opened people's hearts and given them the courage to do the right thing, right? Not the easy thing, not the normal expected thing, but to do the right thing. Right, then I think I would be very, very gratified, at the end of my life, to have had that kind of an impact.
I wish you'll achieve that. Raj, thanks so much for your time. It was lovely talking to you.
You're very welcome.
And I hope to talk to you again in the future.
Thank you. Okay, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Have a great evening, and bye-bye the audience, and see you for next talk. Bye-bye.